Hello, my name is Meg Linton, and I'm the CEO of the Newport Beach Public Library Foundation in Orange County, California. Thank you for inviting us into your homes this evening. When we initially planned this season, Zoom wasn't part of our daily lives yet. In some ways, I mourn our in-person gatherings at the library, but then we wouldn't be sharing this experience with people from near and far. Usually when I do these introductions, there's much housekeeping, but all you really need to know is we are recording the program. And if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The 24th season of the Witte Lectures is made possible by all the sponsors you saw on our slideshow, plus all our ticket holders, dedicated foundation members, the Witte Committee, and the Witte family. Thank you all for going above and beyond to make our programs possible and to help us fulfill the Foundation's mission of providing funds to purchase valuable analog and digital resources for the library. You make our library card a powerful tool for everyone who wields it. We salute you and we appreciate your library-loving ways. I also want to give a shout out to two of our library supporters who are in this virtual auditorium with us. Thank you to Newport Beach City Council members Will O'Neill and Diane Dixon. To find out more about the foundation, how to support the Newport Beach Library, and buy tickets for the upcoming Witte programs with Sam Quinones and Shazia Sikander, please visit our new website at nbplf.foundation. Now I'm going to hand you over to the chair of our Witte Committee, Janet Hadley, and she will introduce our distinguished guest who has promised us a thoughtful, provocative, and humorous evening. Janet, take it away.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Meg. I just have a little technical situation here. I am seeing Meg's name on the screen and I'm not sure I'm on. Kunga, can you let me know?
You're good to go.
Thank you. So thank you all for inviting us into your homes for our second Witte event. I'm Janet Hadley and I'm the chairperson of the Witte Lecture Series Committee. This is our 24th season, as Meg mentioned, and we're really looking forward to our 25th, hopefully in person. I'm hoping you're all at home with family and maybe some friends who are in your bubble and ready to sit back and relax and enjoy some time with PJ O'Rourke. Most of you know, people who have attended before, that the series was founded in 1996 in honor of Martin Witte, a man who loved the idea of a library and cherished his library card. And the purpose of our series is to bring our Newport Beach community and now the wider community, the best speakers on the most timely topics. We couldn't do this without our generous sponsors. And remarkably, this year, in face of a global pandemic, we made our annual request to our sponsors, and for some of them, we didn't even have to ask. They were right there for us and ready to support us, even in these complicated times. Thank you for trusting us to bring something special to our community. In line for recognition also are members of the Witte Lecture Series Committee. I believe there was a slide with their names on there. Many of them have served for over a decade in this capacity, bringing well-respected speakers to our community. And a special shout out to Kunga and Meg and Sean. They're our foundation team and they really make everything happen every day. Also this week, I took a few minutes just to call some of our faithful sponsors, and I'll be calling more in the week to come, just to say thank you. It really does mean everything that you are there to sponsor us. Tonight we have the pleasure of hosting PJ O'Rourke. PJ has written almost 20 books on subjects as diverse as politics, cars, etiquette, and economics. 2 of his books have made it to the number one on the New York Times bestseller list. He's a contributing editor at the Weekly Standard, a fellow at the Cato Institute, and for many of us, most delightfully, he's a panelist on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Tonight, both PJ and I are coming to you from rural New England. He's in New Hampshire and I'm in Massachusetts, and I assume we both shoveled enough snow today. In our post-truth era and in these upsetting, turbulent, contagious, and disruptive times, we could all use a little laughter. It wasn't until this past weekend I was visiting my daughter in Washington, D.C. I drove safely. I had a negative COVID test, and so did she. But she insisted that I watch that crazy cat lawyer video, and I'm not much interested in cats, and I don't really think lawyers are very funny, but I have to tell you, that was one of the funniest videos I've ever seen, and it had me just rolling on the floor laughing. Only then did I appreciate how long it had been since I'd had a good laugh. Currently, we find ourselves in this unpredictable situation. We've got an unimpeachable president, a pandemic, an insurrection, a riot, an assault on the Capitol, the mysteries of QAnon, the rise of the Christian nationals, institutional and structural racism, and most mysteriously, we have a booming stock market while we have people starving, out of work, and feeling pretty hopeless. Well, it's time for us to laugh for sure, and we can't think of anybody better to bring some witty humor to our lives than PJ. Tonight, we'll get to see the world through his wide-angle lens. He has the maturity to have experienced, weathered, and analyzed decades of American politics. Please join me in welcoming this political sage to the witty tonight. Welcome, PJ O'Rourke.
Okay, I've just unmuted myself. That's right at the edge of my technical abilities. we're there. And I hope everything is, Kanga, is everything all right?
Yes, you are all set.
Okay, good. And before I start, I'd just like to put in a little good word for libraries. I think good word for libraries. We haven't been able to go to them lately, but that will change soon, I hope. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, back in the 50s. It was kind of a rough industrial town, and I had kind of a rough childhood. It wasn't not memoir worthy or anything, but you know, my mom was not very well. Her health was bad. My stepfather was drunk. The house was a mess. I was kind of sliding in the direction of juvenile delinquency. The little mean guy type. But the only thing I had going for me at all was that I liked to read. And the only other thing I had going for me was the Toledo Public Library. On Saturday mornings, I get on the bus and I go down to the Toledo Public Library downtown. It's this beautiful WPA building, just an absolutely extraordinary place, still there. With a very nice addition that has been added. And it was a world apart. It was a world where everything was orderly, everything was quiet. People were treated with respect. I was treated with respect. And I loved that place. I still do love that place. And I remember thinking to myself, and I think it was a formative moment. I remember thinking to myself, looking around the Toledo Public Library, I'll bet prison libraries aren't nearly as nice as this. And so I think I owe libraries a lot, and we all do. So that said, my job is to make fun of things. And what we've just been through politically, and what we're still going through with the pandemic, it's just not funny. So in a way, you're being addressed by an unemployed humorist. I mean, January 6th, I wanted to laugh when I saw the half-naked guys with tattoos all over, half-naked guy, the Viking hat, the tattoos, seated in a position to preside over the Senate, remembering Spiro Agnew. I wondered, was this the goofiest person who'd ever sat in that chair? But, the situation was too grim for mirth. Making fun of Donald Trump. The best comedians in the world have done nothing but since 2015 or well before. And this proved to be about as effective as going maskless to a Proud Boys rally with a Feel the Burn bumper sticker plastered across your head. Whoever said laughter is the best medicine hadn't heard of Pfizer or Moderna, and also hadn't heard of voting for a rather tepid, boring, old, regular politician, which is the pill we had to swallow to get rid of Trump. Now, personally, I'm a rather boring, tepid, old, regular Republican, a country club Republican, if you will, or I would be if I could afford a country club or could find a country club that would let me join. And as such, I cannot overemphasize the importance of having gotten this alleged Republican, this demented toddler dressed in a Republican Halloween costume, all trick, no treat, out of the White House. I will even go so far as to fall on my own partisan sword and say that any Republican who didn't vote to impeach Donald Trump should lose the next election. Although nowadays I've got to admit that my GOP partisan sword is more like a Disney Star Wars toy lightsaber. But when my son was younger, I tripped over one of those too, and that can hurt. Am I alone in feeling politically homeless these days? I mean, I'm sort of sleeping under a bridge in terms of party affiliation, but anyway, the President of the United States is both our head of government and our head of state. To put it in British terms, he's Prime Minister and the Queen. So when Trump said what he said and did what he did on January 6th, this is Boris Johnson and Queen Elizabeth II in a big hug, in front of Buckingham Palace, speaking in a single voice, calling for all good Britons to go to the Houses of Parliament and do something mad, bad, dangerous, and extremely stupid. It is a ministerial order. It is a royal command. However, the amazing thing, the wonderful thing about January 6th is it's over. Congress was back in session by that night. Trump was out on his ear 2 weeks later. The nation did not descend into chaos. Our institutions screwed up, although they may sometimes be, survived to screw up another day. And in what has been perhaps, the best sign of health in the American body politic, cable news viewership is down across the board. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, it's down. Now, I know that people are still frightened about the political divisions in America, and they are frightful. But I would urge people to be a little less afraid because of one fundamental national trait that we all share. God bless America's short attention span. I mean, spasms of idiot populism of the kind that brought us Donald Trump, they've been recurrent in American history. They stem from some sort of general dissatisfaction with government. And who hasn't felt that? I mean, anybody here have any trouble getting an appointment to get vaccinated? These populist movements seem to arise suddenly, and usually they disappear with equal speed. In the 1820s, the anti-Masonic Party was a force to be reckoned with. They were convinced there was something terrible about Freemasons. The anti-Masonic Party was opposed to, I don't know, Shriners driving around in tiny cars and Shrine circus parades or something. In the 1850s, considerable political clout was wielded by the Know Nothing Party. It was anti-immigrant, anti-Irish, anti-Catholic. It was convinced that the Pope was behind a conspiracy to subvert America. They were called the Know Nothing Party because they knew nothing. The most popular populist until Donald Trump was William Jennings Bryan in the late 19th, early 20th century. His big issue was free coinage of silver. Now, does that ring any faint bells in the dull tower of memory about being bored in American History 101? Now, the populists who supported Bryan, they wanted the government to print more money because that way everybody would have more money. Now, today, we would call them some kind of left-wing flake advocates of modern monetary theory. But Bryan's populists were primarily rural, with support from labor, especially in mining and heavy industry in what would later be called the Rust Belt. So today, we would call them some kind of right-wing nut supporters of Trump forever. William Jennings Bryan was the Democratic presidential candidate in 1896, in 1900, and in 1908. He nearly won in 1896, and although he never became president, he did become Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. Now, William Jennings Bryan, he had a number of bad political positions besides advocating irresponsible monetary policy. I mean, he supported Jim Crow laws, he favored prohibition, and he was such a mad hat of a pacifist that during World War I, he condemned Woodrow Wilson's condemnation of the sinking of the Lusitania. He resigned as Secretary of State in protest. And I got to say, nobody minded. If William Jennings Bryan, if he has any place at all in the popular memory today, it's because of where he wound up. He wound up, his star long faded, in 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee, defending that state's law forbidding the teaching of evolution in public schools. Byron prosecuted the monkey in the Scopes monkey trial. I foresee Donald Trump winding up about the same way, although probably busier defending his own monkey business than prosecuting monkeys. The end result of Bryan, not of Trump, was, I got to say, a great movie, Inherit the Wind. Inherit the Wind, released in 1960, starring Frederick March as the William Jennings Bryan figure, Spencer Tracy as the Clarence Darrow figure, and Gene Kelly as the H.L. Mencken type reporter enjoying the fun. I suggest it as a Netflix option in case you'd like to watch something more interesting than me. Maybe 35, 40 years from now, we'll be able to enjoy the Trump fun too, but at the moment, not so much so. At the moment, seeing more of Trump would be like a theatrical re-release of Ishtar, or maybe more to the point, The Godfather Part 3. But again, God bless America's short attention span. I think there is some hope. And what I hope is that in a year or two, or maybe even less, Americans will be saying, Donald who? Of all the things fate holds in store for Trump, and I hope they're fateful, one of the most satisfying would be to see him become nothing but a question in a game of Trivial Pursuit. Meanwhile, I feel America could use some extreme moderation, some ideological position occupying the far middle. What this country needs is fewer people who know what this country needs. We would be better off, in my opinion, without so many opinions, especially without so many political opinions, including my own. Our nation faces a multitude of difficult, puzzling, complex, and abstruse problems. Most Americans aren't sure what to do about them. But we lack politicians with the courage to say, I'm not sure what to do about these problems either. In fact, we lack politicians with the courage to say, I'm not sure what abstruse means. Our economy has been upended by technological changes. They make the Industrial Revolution look like tinkering with gadgetry in the garage. The harnessing of steam power, I mean, that was just James Watt putting a bigger tea kettle on a hotter stove. You know? Our second Gilded Age, with its golden pathways across the ether, is a gold brick when it comes to crumbling roads, decaying bridges, rackety public transport, corroding water pipes, collapsing sewers, the power grid in Texas. A soaring economy, well, soaring until COVID clipped its wings anyway. A soaring economy left absurd deprivation in the midst of ridiculous luxury. A click on a website could now deliver everything to everybody except a living wage. And the pandemic has turned what was a hazardous gap in our economic well-being into a terrifying bottomless pit. Now, at the same time all this is happening, we are undergoing social changes so swift and profound that they would send even the best cultural anthropologist fleeing. A later day Margaret Mead, she'd be hiding out in Samoa, hoping like heck to study something as relatively uncomplicated as teenage romance. And then the tic-tac-toe of Cold War diplomacy, that's given way to foreign policy conundrums of tri-dimensional chess like Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock played on the Starship Enterprise, except that the pawns have nukes. Transformations in healthcare have turned the historically cheapest part of being alive, dying, into something so expensive that many people can't afford to do it. And sudden and unexpected epidemic, this COVID-19 epidemic, this has shown us that there's one thing that politics isn't, and that is a shot in the arm. Surviving Americans are left trying to weigh the delicate balance between having a life worth living and having a planet that can support life. And yet our political leaders all think they know the answer to what is to be done. To quote Lenin, a political leader who, among his other faults, flunked his own quiz. The problem with opinions is that they're not synonymous with accomplishing anything. I mean, I have 3 children with strong opinions about climate change, but who cannot remember to close the front door in the wintertime. Now, the traditional dad line, which I've used, we're not heating the outdoors, that has not worked. So I appeal to their wokeness, and of course, they're very woke. I say leaving the front door open causes global warming. And then I drag the snowblower in from the garage to clear the front hall. We need a political system that isn't so darn sure of itself. It is time for the rise of the extreme moderate, power to the far middle. Let's bring the wishy and the washy back together, along with the namby and the pamby and the milk and the toast. The extreme moderate's non-negotiable demand, negotiation. We won't compromise until we see some compromising. We want political action or political inaction. That kind of depends on the circumstances. You know, we used to have a pretty simple political system in this country. Old-fashioned Republicans and old-fashioned Democrats, we used to be engaged in an honest debate we weren't polarized the way we are now. We weren't at each other's throats. And we were just split on some issues. Half of America wanted more social services to be paid for by other people, and half of America was other people. Now, the way it was in the old days, we had two parties in this country, the stupid party and the silly party. I'm stupid, so I voted for the stupid party. I voted Republican because Republicans had fewer ideas, although not few enough. Iran-Contra, the Iraq War, mortgage-backed collateralized debt obligations. But that was back then. The way it used to be, Democrats would say, government can make us richer, smarter, taller, with a better healthcare insurance policy and 10 strokes off our golf game. And the Republicans would say, the government doesn't work. Then they would get elected and prove it. The Democrats would say, we don't know what's wrong with the economy, but we can fix it. The Republicans would say, there's nothing wrong with the economy and we can fix that. But alas, that's just not the way it is anymore. Now, we're not in an honest debate. We're in a storm of angry opinions. And wouldn't it be great if we had an opinion-free news media source? I've got the name for it. Happy medium, I'd like to call it. So I think we should try getting back to a happy place. Now, we may be on different sides of the fence, but let's make that fence top wider and better padded and go sit on it. And then, no matter if I'm of conservative ilk and you're of liberal stripe, we can have a neighborly chat. We can chat about laissez-faire. Should the government be laissez? Should the government be fair? We're all in favor of peace, but when the wolf dwells with the lamb and the leopard lies down with the kid, how often are we going to have to replace those sheep and goats? Does Medicare for all mean young people have to wear trifocals and Depends and trade their bicycles for walkers? If taxpayer money is used to pay for political campaigns, do taxpayers have 90 days to return the politicians for a full refund? Do the politicians have to be in their original packaging? Animal rights are important, but what about animal responsibilities? Does pursuit of happiness mean I can drink before noon? These are all important questions. I mean, let's discuss them while making social justice more sociable. I mean, here, have a little nip from my hip flask. We might be able to come to some accommodation with each other's views. If today's political leaders, if they would rather burn the milquetoast and ignore the wishy-washy's wishes, extreme moderates should hang them out with a wash and they'll be toast, mixed metaphorically speaking, of course, because harsh words and rash actions are not our style. Indeed, how to go about being an extreme moderate presents some problems. The kind of things that other extremists do seem so extreme. But I do have one idea. Free speech. Free speech should not only be protected, it should be compulsory. I mean, if everyone with a strong political opinion, they should be required to wear a sign proclaiming it. I mean, if you passionately advocate a universal basic income, wear a badge saying so while you talk to your teenage children about running up your visa bill. If you admire Vladimir Putin's style of leadership, get his face on your t-shirt. I'm sure one is available from the Kremlin gift shop or at Mar-a-Lago. Hang an "Immigration is Ruining America" placard around your neck and see how you get treated by restaurant staff, Uber drivers, and your immigrant grandparents. Visit your personal physician with "I want the government to run your doctor's office" lettered in magic marker across your abdomen. Sorry, Senator Sanders, but it looks like we're going to have to remove your other appendix. Anyway, that's all I know, but if anybody in our viewing audience has any questions, I will make up some other stuff. Kunga, have we got any questions out there? Hi, Janet. I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can or not.
No, I will unmute myself. There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would long to return to something that feels more like the center. I grew up in the same period that you did, and in the 50s. I do remember the exchanges between Democrats and Republicans within family and within our community. But although it seemed like a more a time when exchange was easier, I also remember it as being all men. Our politicians have become much more diverse. We have
all men and all white.
Yes, all men and all white. So our political population is now more diverse, and there are women, different religions. Some people are a little crazy. What do you think about the change in mix?
Well, actually, you bring up a very good point and a very hopeful point. As a matter of fact, people get along and have greater degree of equal protection before the law and equal opportunity by a long shot than they did when we were kids. It's tempting sometimes to look back on the 50s as a period of relative quiet, of relative social quiet, and no great disturbances. First place, that's not really quite true. But in the second place, a lot of the trouble in America was covered up, simply ignored. I don't mean covered up in a conspiratorial way. I mean, people didn't, the great majority of Americans simply didn't care about the plight of people who were different than they were, didn't regard racial or religious prejudice as being, much of something to concern them. Things are a lot better. We should not forget, as heated and as ugly as politics has been recently, actually for decades, we shouldn't forget there's actually been an enormous improvement in social and economic conditions in America. There's a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. But then again, we have come a long way.
The recent death of, so one of the things that's also very different about the current times, different than when you and I grew up, is media. And I think one of the biggest impacts on media is the 46 million people that followed Rush Limbaugh.
Interesting case. It was an interesting career arc that Rush Limbaugh had. I think people will probably remember him mostly as a cheerleader for that kind of ugly sort of populism that I was talking about. That has been an American problem, not just with Donald Trump, but dating all the way back to close to the foundation of the. Although there was one early outbreak of populism called the Whiskey Rebellion that I think I might have joined in. All the rest of them seem pretty horrible. The Civil War itself can be regarded as a sort of populist madness among sectional people in a sectional area of the United States. But what was interesting about Rush Limbaugh, if you followed his whole career, and I remember, first hearing him back in the end of the 80s, early 90s, when he started out, I mean, you might never have agreed with him. He was very conservative. One might never have agreed with him. but he had an ability to walk you through something like an appropriations bill, a big bloated appropriations bill, and make it interesting and funny and make his points. He did a lot of work and a lot of research. Later on in his career, he became more bellicose, more self-important, more objectionable, I would say. But he had a kind of interesting ability at the beginning to explain issues, often issues of whether you agree with them or disagree with them. They were important issues, but they were also the kind of issues that people tended not to pay attention to. And so in that sense, he was kind of a valuable voice at least at the onset.
I like what you said about his ability to dissect an appropriations bill. I don't really remember that part of him, but a number of programs I've been listening to have been wondering if he, how much of it was just an act, because people said very kind things about him and what a thoughtful person he was. And yet other people who are LGBTQ or Black or people with disabilities didn't always have the same feeling to him. So he's kind of a curious person.
Didn't know him, so can't really say.
Huh?
But the great English novelist Anthony Trollope in his autobiography raised the question of he was never popular with the critics of his day.
Uh-huh.
And he raised the question of why critics are so vicious. And there certainly was an element of the vicious in more than an element of the vicious in Rush Limbaugh's radio performance, howsoever nice he may have been around the house. Of that I cannot speak. But Trollope said, give a man a hammer and he will hit things with them as hard as he can. And I think that partly explains it. And that partly explains all kinds of stridency, if you think about it, not just stridency on the right, but stridency on the left too.
Mhm.
It speaks to certain kind, and not only to certain kinds of prejudice and bigotry, or certain kinds of chauvinism, or faux patriotism and nationalism, but it also speaks to certain kinds of cancel culture and no platforming and shouting of speakers down and things like that.
It makes me long for Paul Tsongas. I don't know if you remember him.
I do remember Paul Tsongas. It was so sad because Paul Tsongas is governor of Massachusetts and a presidential senator from Massachusetts, and was ticketed as a presidential hopeful at one time. A little too cerebral for good old stem winding sort of campaigning, perhaps. I believe he died of brain cancer, didn't he?
He did die of cancer. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was brain cancer, and there was a great irony in that because he was one of the rare politicians who had one.
That's right. I remember going in to buy a car, and I had a Tsongas sticker on the back of my car, and or actually it was in a parking lot one day. When I came out, I had the longest note that somebody left on my dashboard about how much they missed him and admired him.
Oh.
It was kind of warm-hearted. We have a couple of questions from our audience. From Liz Ann Witte, tell us what you're thinking about California these days. There are attempts underfoot to recall our governor.
Yeah, well, it kind of looks like a mess from here, but that's going to be, I live in New Hampshire, and one of the things that New Hampshire, possibly the only thing that we've got going for us, is we're a little bitty state. We don't have all that many people. It's people will say, well, you don't have that many problems. Well, we don't have that many people to have that many problems. We do have, of course, plenty of our share of our own problems. We've got pretty serious opioid crisis going on up here. We have considerable amount of poverty. It's not as visible as it is some places in else in the country. We have we may not be terribly diverse in our population, but we we have plenty of prejudice and bigotry to go around. I mean, this is a place where I moved up here in the 70s, and there was still there was a strong vocal prejudice against French Canadians. French Canadians were the people who were. I mean, it seems sort of amazing now, but I mean, within fairly recent memory, there was a very considerable prejudice against French Canadians.
Mm.
Anyway, I don't want to. California is so big; it's so many different places, and it has so much diversity of every conceivable kind, from people to climate, that making an overall judgment of the place, it's tempting, but it's probably a temptation that should be resisted. I do think that California experienced many years of having a booming economy and things going really well, and they there was a Californian tendency to think that this was always going to be the case and this was going to last forever. And I think that there was a fair amount of overspending and sort of overbuilding, and I mean governmental sort of overbuilding, overspending, overextending the government, never thinking about, gosh, this might not last forever, or we might have some problems of one kind or another. That there was no rainy day fund in California, and so when things turned rough for California, California sort of wasn't prepared for that in the same way that Texas wasn't prepared for cold weather.
Oh, that is, people are just in dire straits there, I have to tell you. We have a question from Will O'Neill, who wants to know, he said, besides national politics, tell us what your thoughts are about issues at local levels that are similar.
Well, I do wish that people would get more involved in local level politics, and I plead guilty myself. I tend to stay out of this, but one of the things that makes America kind of politically nutty, is the extreme decentralization of our political parties. Our political parties have, of course, a national leadership. They have national chairmen. They have their national headquarters in Washington. But those national organizations of our political parties really don't have much power. The power lies with the state, individual state political parties. And then at a state level, you have state leadership in your political parties, but the state leaders actually don't have much power either. It's the county leaders, the county chairman of the political party, who really wield a great deal of attention, and who pays any attention to the county level politics, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Do you know who your county chairman is? Bet I don't know who mine is. I'll bet you anything you don't know who yours is. Nobody knows who they are. And so the political parties tend to be sort of invaded at a county level by, you get like the head of the Republican county party will be somebody in plaid polyester pants with matching white shoes and vinyl belt, who used to sell aluminum siding, and the head of the local county Democratic Party will be an embittered woman with 5 ex-husbands and 40 cats, and it just, this is who runs the country. And so it behooves us all to get out there and get involved in this stuff, if we belong to a political party at all, or to be, we have in New Hampshire, and it's probably only practical because we are a small state and we're mostly small towns. I'll bet no one watching can name the largest city in New Hampshire, and I'm not quite sure I can. It's either Manchester or Nashua. I'm guessing Manchester, but anyway, when it comes to great big cities, we don't have them. So we have these town meetings. We basically all get together in our town. Anybody can come, and we thrash out in one long, dreadfully boring session. We thrash out the whole budget of the town, and hours will be spent arguing over, the road grader, whether we need a new road grader or not. And on the other hand, like some other larger budgetary considerations will be like passed off in the wink of an eye, before you even knew they went by. But nonetheless, we all get a chance to get in there and, get our oar in, get our 2 cents in. And New Hampshireites are pretty good about attending these things. And we may not rate very high in certain respects nationally, but we have very good rating in terms of government efficiency. It's not that our government is actually very good, but given what they spend, they get pretty good value for it. And there's something to be said for that.
So you like participatory government?
Well, I think, we're a democracy. It's sort of necessary. We can't just stand back and like deplore what other people do, it's our fault too. We have a say in these things.
There's the same sense here in Westport. We are, it's a lot of chatter over the fence of, are you going to the meeting to talk about such and such, the new high school, whatever.
Yeah.
So, but it's that, when I meant participatory, I meant kind of an up close and personal experience.
Yeah.
A couple of Trump questions. Do you think he's really going to disappear in 2 years, considering he has over $290 million or something that he raised?
That he scammed.
That he did scam, yes.
In order to go, I was covering the primary up here and and various other political events. And in order to get into any Trump event, you had to submit your email address. Even press had to do this. And of course, press were not very welcome at Trump rallies. And so I think I must have gone to one. I think I went to one as a civilian. And in order to get in, you had to give your email address. So they got my email address. And I daily, I would delete 30, 35 of these requests. This is after the election. He had lost the election. And I was getting 30 requests a day to contribute to the theft of the election fund or whatever the heck it was. Yeah, so I think that money should be taken away from him. But okay, he's got a lot of money, and he has a lot of people who voted for him. I mean, more, he had the second most people voted for him than have ever voted for anybody in the United States. But you always have to remember that. Well, there's a little story I tell about Trump supporters, and of course, this may again be somewhat regional, because I think that there was quite a bit of Trump support. He didn't win New Hampshire, but he had quite a bit of support here. But I don't think the support was the sort of Boogaloo Boys or Proud Boys or whatever percenters they call themselves to be, Oath Keepers and all that nonsense. I think it was more a sort of what I talked about in my talk about the general dissatisfaction with government. I remember got into a conversation with a guy that I really liked at a Trump rally. Just a regular guy. He was a guy he ran a garage body shop, car towing service, and he's wearing a Trump button. And I said, so what do you think about Trump, as a person? And he said, well, I think he's a little out of whack. I said, but you're wearing a Trump button. He said, yeah. And I said, would you want him in your house? I mean, would you want him to bring him home? He goes, no, like I say, I think the guy's a little out of whack. I wouldn't want him in the house. And I said, so why are you supporting him? And he said, well, look, he said, I've got this business. I've got this gas station business, and it's doing well. It's doing quite well. I'm glad it's good, prosperous business. But I've got 25-year-old gasoline tanks in the ground, and I can't get the local permit. I can't get the state permit. I can't get the federal permit to dig these tanks up. It's time for them to be replaced, and I can't get the permits to replace them. And I can't get the permits to put new tanks in. I can't get the local, I can't get the state, I can't get the federal permits to put them in. He said, I give my guys that work for me health benefits. We're doing well. Like I said, I can afford to give them health benefits. I said, it's not Obamacare I'm mad about so much, but every time somebody gets a bright idea like Obamacare down in Washington, this stack of paper the size of the old Boston phone book lands on my desk, and he said, I don't have an HR department. I don't have a legal department. It's just me and my wife that run this business. And I'm a mechanic, I'm not a bookkeeper. He says, and I got a junkyard out back. It's been a junkyard since the 1920s, and now it's got an endangered newt living in it, and so on. The guy was nice. The guy was funny. And so at the end of this, I said, okay, I get it. I get why you're upset and why you're frustrated. But tell me this, how does sending a maniac to Washington fix this? And he says, I don't know. He says, but it's what they got coming. So let us not forget that Trump voter. And I also doubt, I wish I'd kept in touch with the guy. He was sort of over on the other side of the state, or I would have. But I'll bet he didn't vote for him again. But anyway, or maybe he did. I don't know, let us forget that there are a lot of people this was a gesture of frustration. Trump was a gesture of frustration with a changing world, a difficult world, a government that sometimes seems remote and unresponsive, sometimes seems highly elitist. So just because a person voted for Trump doesn't mean, or just because a lot of people voted for Trump doesn't mean that he has this undying core of support that is going to bring him back politically. I'm hoping that the guy's a spent force.
Well, if we could get, the gas tanks removed and replaced, we might get a new voter. I mean, it does so often come down to those very personal stories.
It does. It does. It often does. You have to talk to people. If you want to understand why people are where they are politically, you have to talk to them about the personal is the political, as we used to say back in the 60s. And there is such truth to that.
Oh, another interesting topic, conspiracy theorists. Do you think they're more prevalent today or just more visible?
Oh, just more visible. This has been going on forever, This has been,
QAnon specifically.
Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that was long before the internet, that was something like cooked up in Russia back in the, it was a book in a country where nobody could read, and it still made an impact. No, I think conspiracy theories are always with us. And one of the things about them, and it's funny, I was just writing about this, and I took my lead from a Bryan Klaas, is an opinion writer for the Washington Post, and he wrote an excellent opinion piece about conspiracy theories. Naturally, given the temper of the times and of course the temper of the Post, it was aimed at Trump conspiracy, QAnon, and I think it was called Why Are Trump Conspiracy Theorists So Hard to Fix or Deprogram, or I don't remember exactly what the word was used. It was cure, I think was what he meant. I'm not sure what he said in the headline. But anyway, he brought up this point, besides giving, this sort of like conspiratorial mindset, and the sociologists have studied this for years. There's certain types of personalities and certain types of intellectual leanings that make a person much more prone to conspiracy theories. There's this deep-seated human desire to see patterns in things, and so on. So he goes through all that, and then he says, but the other thing that we don't pay enough attention to is the conspiracy theories are fun. And they
Oh,
are, they give you this little group of insiders, that you're a part of. And of course, the internet makes this so much easier. It wasn't long ago, 20 years ago, if you were going to be a nut with a conspiracy theory, it was a lot of work. You had
mm,
to get a mimeograph machine, then you had to cut one of those horrible mimeograph stencils, and get mimeo ink all over you and crank out these and you had to pass the mimeograph pamphlets out on street corners. And you had to carry a soapbox with you and stand on the soapbox and give speeches to nobody. And it was a lot of work being a crank and getting an audience. And now you can do it with a click of a finger. So does that increase the number of conspiracy theories? I don't know, but it certainly increases their presence in our life. It increases their visibility. It all comes down to, all conspiracy theories basically come down to the idea that the world is so stupid that even I can understand it.
the other big theme, though, that you're talking about when you just listed all of the groups of Trump supporters, the Proud Boys, the
Yeah.
Oath Keepers, and now you've got conspiracy theorists who like to be part of a group, have something in common with a small group of people and to be in the know. I really have that very strong message of people want to belong. They want to be important. They want to
They do.
be.
And modern society makes that very hard. I mean, it
Yeah.
makes it easy over the internet. It's easy to have a sort of virtual group. But, the way that we live, the fact that we move around a lot, the fact that families are smaller than they used to be and not so close to each other, the fact that our grandparents don't live in the house, they live in the retirement home, or they live someplace down in Florida. The relative ease of divorce, the number of kids running around with only one parent or being shuttled back and forth between two parents, even something that is, even some very good things like the fact that the other half of our population have moved into the workforce, makes for less community. I mean, everything has a price. Every freedom, every benefit has a price. The magnet schools, they may be, I'm no educational expert. They may be an absolutely wonderful idea, but they take you away from the neighborhood school, which created a sort of community. All sorts of things have, the bowling alone phenomenon,
Right.
whoever it was that wrote that, all sorts of things, maybe just our greater prosperity has caused us to be, when we were trading vegetables from our vegetable garden over the back fence with our neighbors, we had more community than when we were, driving 50 miles to get them from the super organic, fair traded, um, so it's harder and harder for people, I think, to build community. We change jobs a lot more than we used to. In the workplace, of course, is a kind of community. And so I think people go for a kind of synthetic community that they find on the internet.
Mhm. Just getting back to politics, because Trump won't be around forever. Who do you see the GOP nominating, perhaps, in the next?
Boy, I honestly don't know. I am confused about what's going on in what I once regarded more or less as my political party. I tried to explain to people that this isn't really my fault, my being a Republican. I'm ethnically Republican. Uh, my grandmother, who was actually very politically active, my grandmother grew up on a farm in downstate Illinois, and her father was very active in Republican politics, as the family was active in Republican politics from the time of Lincoln. They weren't that far from Springfield, Illinois, and so that had always been. And in those days, the annual political convention of the GOP was always held in Chicago, which was just up the railroad line. And my grandfather started taking my grandmother to these political events, to these political conventions from the time she was about 10 or so. So it was absolutely in her blood. She was furious. She was furious at Roosevelt, not Franklin Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt, for splitting the Republican Party and allowing that Confederate Wilson to be elected over Taft. And so anyway, my great grandfather was friends with President McKinley, and so I grew up with this sort of thing. And so I come home from college with my hair down to my butt and a jean jacket with a big red fist on the back, and my grandmother looks at me and she said, "Pat, I'm worried. Are you turning into a Democrat?" I said, "Democrat? Grandma, LBJ's a Democrat. He's just as big a fascist as Richard Nixon. Of course, I'm not a Democrat. I am a communist." My grandmother looked at me and she said, "Well, just as long as you're not a Democrat."
Well, speaking of Democrats and Republicans, what do you think about a third party?
Well, that doesn't really work in the United States because, as I, partly explained about the county chairman and stuff, we don't have these parties like they do in Europe. I mean, we don't have you can't be obviously from some of the people who are in our two political parties. It's obvious you can't be expelled from one of our political parties, and if you give so much as a nickel to any campaign on either side of the aisle, you have joined. You'll never get rid of the people. You're on their mailing list and email list forever, like I was with Trump's get out of jail free card requests. And our political parties don't have ideologies, really. They don't have theorists. What we have in this country is two general tendencies that sometimes have a lot of overlap and sometimes have very little. But the two general tendencies are the government should fix this problem and the government is this problem. Mm-hmm. And actually, you can hold both those ideas in your head at the same time without cognitive dissonance, without becoming a crazy person. Mm-hmm. For instance, a visit to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Now, we're all grateful for the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's very nice that the roads are paved. It's helpful and that we've got yellow lines down the middle, and that it's been decided which side of the road we drive on. That stop signs and stoplights are a good thing. Even speed limits, though they may occasionally annoy us, we understand the principle behind them. We're grateful for the Department of Motor Vehicles. On the other hand, I've been here all day to register a boat trailer. So you can simultaneously think the government should fix this problem, and the government is the problem. So we have these two very vague tendencies with a lot of crossover in between. And of course, increasingly, independents are as numerous as adherents to the so-called parties that we've got. So what generally happens in the United States, and this is kind of always the way it has been, generally you don't get a third party until one of the main parties actually collapses, like the Whigs did, maybe for a little while during the Civil War, you had two Democratic parties. You had the Democratic Party in the South in the Confederacy, and then you had the War Democrats. You had the pro-Union Democrats in the North. But that was a wartime anomaly, and the two parts of the party came back together after the war, rather to the detriment of society to some extent, because that was how Reconstruction was undercut and Jim Crow laws were established. But nonetheless, you see what I'm saying here. Basically, is with these two general vague tendencies. Both parties pitch a large tent, and pitching a third tent doesn't really do much.
Well, our last question will be, now that we're not going to have a third party, we still have to contend with social media. And do you think that before Biden leaves office, there'll be more regulation in social media, or do you think we'll have to wait longer?
Oh no, regulation is coming. What is it? The pertinent act is, I want to say section 238, but I could very easily have the numbers wrong. I'm not a great numbers guy. But there is a section in our Communications Act that basically absolves the social media companies for responsibility in what it appears on their social media platforms. But they're also treated, they're not treated as a utility or as a common carrier, they're treated as private corporations. So when they put something bad up or allow something bad to go up, it's not their fault. On the other hand, when they want to take something down because they don't agree with it, and I'm kind of opposed to that because, I mean, for instance, I consider Trump a big nut and a threat, but I want to know what he's saying. I would just as soon shine the sunlight on it. But anyway, so when they would take something off a social media platform because they don't like it, they don't approve it, or their employees don't approve of it, then they're a private company. They have the perfect right to take anything off, but they have no responsibility of letting anything on. So that's just asking for it, especially when these social media companies have grown so large as to be, they're not monopolies really in the technical sense, but they are in a position, it may be temporary, but they're in a position to act monopolistically. And so and so everybody, the Democrats are mad at them for being monopolies. The Republicans are mad at them for, for their political correctness. Everybody's mad at them, and something unpleasant is going to happen to these companies. Unpleasant from their point of view. I'm not sure it'll be unpleasant from our point of view. What of course really happens with new forms of communication is that people get used to them and learn how to sort them out. We think of newspapers as being, we think of old-fashioned newspapers as being sort of above the fray, and even more so old-fashioned television stations when there were just 3 stations on the air, that they're giving equal time. They had to under law, and that they were above the political fray and nonpartisan stuff. It was a very brief, temporary situation. When printing presses first became cheap enough and paper became cheap enough to make printing presses available in all of America's small towns, the papers were viciously partisan, terribly partisan. In fact, when the printing press was invented, what was the first result of the printing press? The Bible got printed. People started reading the Bible. People started disagreeing with each other about the Bible. You could make a pretty strong argument that Gutenberg invention of movable type led directly to the 30 Years' War. New forms of communication are always hard for society to digest, and I think, left to our own devices, we would be able to digest social media. I mean, we talk about Facebook being so important this way, that I say Facebook to my kids, ages 17 to 23, and they look at me like, Facebook. What? Facebook, it's for grandparents, and puppies, and stuff. They would never.
And it's already passé.
Yeah, they would never think of using Facebook.
Well, thank you for sharing this, for the two of us, a lovely winter night together in New England.
Yes, we're fine.
I know the flowers are already up and people are celebrating spring. So it was a pleasure to spend an evening with you. Thank you very much. And
well, thank you, Janet. It was really great. And my thanks to Newport Beach Library Foundation and the Witte family. It was a real pleasure.
take care.
You too. Good night.